So, good morning, everybody. I want to talk about AEW Dynamite, and this is actually going to be a very lengthy video, but there were a lot of people complaining about AEW last night. Like, a lot of people saying that there's a lack of stories, there's a lack of consistency, and also, there's a lot of just like plot holes with AEW. And ultimately, they're doing what they do best. Like with AEW, they always really emphasize long matches, epic matches, and dream matches. And they just kind of like rush when they have pay per views and other things like that. Like ultimately, it's that's kind of like the AEW formula, which is that weekly television sucks in storytelling, but we emphasize matches and we don't care about plot holes or whatever really. So, and as I said, you see the diminishing return that they had like over 1 million people. They started with 2 million people. They had 1 million people for a while, and then I think like maybe like last year they got under 1 million, and they kind of have been sticking around like 600,000 like people. So obviously things do need to change, and that's very, very important. And I also will say that one big concern are two things. That number one, they've not announced Wembley Stadium, and I think they're a little afraid to announce Wembley Stadium because I think they're not going to get as many people, and that has to be like that have to get at least 50,000 people in that arena to say, hey, this is not an embarrassment. Really, I really think they're going to change it to the O2 in London, but the other issue that I'm very concerned about that nobody's really talking about is AEW Australia. They have two Australia shows. I think one on Saturday and one on Sunday in one in Brisbane, one in Adelaide. And the problem with these shows is that nobody knows that these are pay-per-views. Handy Danny Notebook. Nobody knows if these are pay-per-views. Nobody knows if this is actually like a collision or whatever. But it's very, very evidential that we are getting to a point where it's almost like, like with AEW, it's almost like we're getting to a point of, what's this company really about? Are they about any type of progression, really? And one of the reasons why people are liking TNA wrestling is because it seems like with Carlos and other people that there is a sense of progression. There is a sense of saying, hey, you know what, we want to do bigger and better. And that's what is lacking in professional wrestling. There's WWE who's reached the mountaintop and says, hey, we got so many fans. We're getting money from everywhere. We don't care about our potential really because we already reached the mountaintop. They're almost like McDonald's. They got to a certain point. They don't want to do better, and then there's AEW where they don't want to challenge themselves, and then there's TNA wrestling where they repeat the same mistakes over and over really. So that's kind of what you got really. But there will be a point where a lot of people are going to say, well, professional wrestling is dead. And then you're going to get a lot of people who don't watch it anymore. And then what's going to happen is it's just going to be too late to save it. And then a lot of companies are going to close, and then professional wrestling is going to be dead. That seems to be the future that we're working towards. So I think AEW really needs to get it together. They need to treat every show like a big deal. And I also think when I review it, one big thing is talking about what they could have done. And everything will show, like, not just, oh, this sucks, that sucks, but what could they have done in this show to make things better. So it opens with MJF. This was actually a good idea because obviously you want to start your show with something important. So start with your heavyweight champion. I was asking myself, are they going to talk about the Australia shows during this episode? No. Are they going to set up matches for Australia? They don't do that. That's bad. And he follows up from last week saying that Bandito is a loser and nobody's on his level. So I appreciate that continuity. Brody King comes out. He calls MGF a bitch. I want a match with you and take your world title. He gets a large reaction from the crowd. And I kind of said, too, that this is actually a good move because Brody King can talk on the microphone. He's a big man, he's athletic, and he's never had an opportunity to go after the World Heavyweight Championship. And then also, too, people are mad that Hobbs left the company, and one of the issues with that, they don't book big men that well. So obviously having Brody King as a champion or a contender, this actually fixes a lot of problems, really. But MGF is right, who is Brody King really beaten? He's beaten a bunch of jobbers, but he's never really beaten like a Swerve or other people like this. So this is a good setting up Brody King. So here is kind of the issue. You could have done something like, okay, well, MJF says this is what I'm gonna do. In Australia, we're gonna have a tournament, and if you win this tournament, you're gonna face me at Revolution. So you could have done um, Brody King, Source Strickland, Hangman, Kenny Omega, Samoa Joe, Kevin Knight, Speedball Mike Bailey, and a few other people, maybe Okada or something like that. You kind of like make a tournament and have these people face each other on night one, night two in Australia, and then have a semifinals, and then the winner faces MJF, really. So I think that that's what they could have done. You give yourself some matches for the Australia show. You tell the people at home in America, hey, check out our Australia event. Hey, pay money to the Australia event. So that way we're not doing something like you're having a show with no purpose, really, or a show with no matches. You have to say, every market we go into, the Australia market, the Europe market, the Canadian market, the Mexico market, the North American market, our shows fucking matter. Our shows fucking matter because we actually are building something. We're building a story that works, really. Um, so the next match was Speedball Mike Bailey versus Samoa Joe. They were trying to give Mike Bailey and Kevin Knight matches since they won the trios title, but this is kind of laughable because the issue is that Samoa Joe is such a bigger person, and Speedball is kind of like such a smaller person. This is kind of like embarrassing for Joe to do this. I was not invested in this match because this is embarrassing for Joe. You did Hangman and Joe. That could be something, or you did like a tournament match, Hangman versus Joe. That could be something. But Speedball versus Joe. They mentioned that Brody King, Kenny Omega, and Samoa Joe want to challenge for the heavyweight title. I appreciate this because you're rebuilding your heavyweight championship division. Because in AEW, they've done a lot of things to just not have a heavyweight championship division. It was like John Moxley with the title last year. So I appreciate now they're saying, hey, the heavyweight championship division has these wrestlers. Throughout the match, Hook and Shibata keep attacking Speedball. Speedball does a muscle drop kick, a top rope shooting star press, and he does a lot of offense to Samoa Joe before getting 2 counts. So I appreciate that it took a while for him to kind of overcome a bunch of obstacles and get like 2 counts. Shibata does a suplex on the ring apron, a ring to the ringside area, and also on the ramp area. He does like a series of suplexes. He takes Speedball, does a suplex to him on the apron, does a suplex to him on the ringside area, does a suplex to him on the ramp area. And then also too that when towards the end of the match, Samoa Joe does a knee breaker, which is like a power bomb to the knees, and then a muscle buster to a Speedball. So it was a really good match because you're showing that it was an uphill battle for Speedball. He got some 2 counts of Samoa Joe. Even though that there was some interference, it wasn't like it made Joe look like a pussy. It kind of says, okay, this is just who Joe is. He has his boys interfere, really. But it was good that Speedball didn't win, really. I don't think that the ops were there to say, oh, well, Joe can't beat Speedball. They're like, oh, well, we want to give you a hard time, really. So the next match was Don Cal, and it was also a good type of, oh, well, it's an uphill battle for Speedball, so I appreciate that. The next match was the Death Riders versus the Don Callis family street fight. It was Rocky Romero, Lance Archer, and Hechicero, so automatically you know who was going to win because these are the lower echelon members. These are the jobbers of the Don Callis family. So Danny Garcia puts Hechicero's leg in a trash can and then stomps on it over and over. Lance Archer chokeslams Yuta through the timekeeper table. Marty Shafir puts submissions on Lance Archer, and then after that, Moxley hits him with a cutter. Lance Archer puts Moxley through a table. Moxley pulls out a barbed wire, broken glass board. Lance Archer chokeslams Moxley into it, and he bleeds profusely. Lance Archer brings Wheeler Yuta up the ringside apron. Lance Archer brings up Wheeler Yuta to the ramp area, and Pac and Claudio start attacking Lance Archer. They slam Lance Archer into an electrical box, and I believe it was Rocky Romero who was in the ring. He got some. There was a submission put on him by John Moxley. That's how they won the match. So I said there was too much interference. Um, it made the Don Callis family look really stupid because it's like they have 14 members. So it's a street fight, anything goes. So could they have all 14 people out there? And I was also kind of saying to myself, this makes Don Callis look stupid. Why would he have three people in his family who regularly loses do this shit? And I also was saying, and there's a lot of people who were talking about this, that number one, you have your obligatory Moxley bleeds every single show, really. So why are you having him bleed again? They could have done without that. It's too repetitive. It's like what happened with Darby Allin. I appreciate Darby Allin at the end of the year when it was him versus Gabe Kidd and him versus Pac, and they didn't have bloody matches, or I mean, they didn't have like a hardcore stipulation. If you always have Moxley do hardcore shit, the same thing with Darby Allin. If they always do hardcore shit, it doesn't stand out. The next thing that I would say is that a lot of people were kind of saying too, Marina Shafir helped out, so she went to babyface. Mox is kind of like babyface now, so they all went babyface to this. And later on, Marina Shafir attacks Tony Storm. She went from like heel to babyface to heel in the same show, so it does feel very like bipolar, type of thing. The next match with FTR versus Alec Pierce and Jordan Oliver. I was not invested in this match whatsoever. I didn't really watch it because I knew that they're going to lose. They said that these two people were just signed to AEW. And I kind of said to who the fuck are these guys? Nobody knows who the fuck they are. They actually mentioned that they were from Ring of Honor, but then there's some people saying that MJF wrestled in like Portland, Maine this weekend. So one of them wrestled MJF. I don't know who the fuck these guys are really. So why should I be invested in them? Like, who are these people? Why aren't you building to these? Why aren't you establishing people? Why aren't you doing backstage promos with the people? Why aren't they saying, hey, we got a match with the champions. We need to have an upset. We need to kind of show the best that we can really um, show what they can do in the ring by a video montage, like establishing. This is where AEW really struggles. They don't establish people. So I didn't really care about this. Um, and then I fell asleep after this match. So I actually had to rewatch a bunch of things at work. And then this morning, Kenny Omega versus Josh Alexander. This was like the match of the night. Josh Alexander does a second rope follow slam, military press in the ring apron with Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega does a snapdragon on the exposed floor. Missile drop kick back to. He does a missile drop kick to the back of Josh Alexander's neck. He does a neck breaker to him. Josh Alexander does a suplex to out of the ring. They're spending, and I also kind of was saying too, they were doing a lot of offense in the outside the ring area. So this is not good because, as I said before, with AEW, the rule is if two wrestlers go outside the ring, they do some fuckery, they fight around outside the ring. They don't care about the 10 count. The 10 round count gets suspended. Don't do that. That's breaking rules. Because again, there's rules to everything, really. So why are they suspending rules? That makes no sense. Kenny Omega wins with a one-winged angel. It was a long match. It was hard-hitting. They were really just like intense. So it was a great match, but where this leads to. And also, isn't Josh Alexander doing a show with Don Callis and Maple Leaf Wrestling and Ring of Honor in a couple of months in April? Could they in March? I think they're doing a show like Maple Leaf Wrestling versus ROH, and then Maple Leaf Wrestling has a show. I believe Josh Alexander is the Maple Leaf Wrestling Pro Champion, really. So why can't he come out with his belt? Why is Mercedes the one who can only come out with belts from other companies? Could they have advertised this show during this match? So this is not good. The next match was Tony Storm and Mina versus Megan Bag and Penelope Ford. This doesn't make any sense. Isn't it Megan Bain and Marina Shafir? This doesn't make any sense. I know Penelope Ford was injured, but it makes sense to say, hey, it's the three of them as a group, really. They should have just said we're a group all together, really. I understand they're trying to establish at the end of the match that they're still in a group. Megan Bain, Penelope Ford, Marina Shafir. Megan Bain does a fallaway slam on Tony Storm. She throws Mina over she throws Mina over Tony Storm, and Mina falls down in the ringside area, really. So a lot of people were saying that this was a botch. Like she meant to throw Mina Shirakawa over her head, and Tony Storm was supposed to catch her, but she threw her too strongly. That Mina fell to the ringside area and got hurt. Um, she picks up Penelope Ford and throws them onto Mina and Tony Storm. Mia Shirakawa does a top rope drop kick onto Megan Bayne. Tony Storm does drop kicks and snap mirrors to Penelope Ford. Maria Shafir puts Tony Storm into a submission hold, so Tony Storm can't stop the pinfall on Mina Shirakawa. Um, so I was kind of saying to myself, again, that's what a lot of people are saying. Tony Storm, I know Megan, Maria Shafir. She's kind of the Death Riders are kind of like baby faces now. When they fight against Don Callis family, now Maria Shafir is coming out here and helping out Megan Bay Penelope Fortune. Now she's a heel, so she went from heel to babyface back to heel in the same match, like 3 different switches. What the fuck is that? It's announced that Claudio and Roderick Strong are facing each other for the CMLL title. Roderick Strong, who sounds like Johnny Knoxville, who has dorky glasses, who doesn't look like a legitimate threat, really. So it's almost like, why the hell are you high on Roderick Strong? He's not a formidable competitor to anybody. Kevin Knight versus Swerve Strickland. Kevin Knight does a drop kick off the top rope on Swerve Strickland. Swerve Strickland does a pile driver on the guardrail. Kevin Knight does a top rope, a Hurricane Run on Coast to Coast, UFO splash. Swerve Strickland does a reverted breaker and big pressure. So, as I said before, and a lot of people are saying, where are you going with Kevin Knight and also a Speedball Mike Bailey? And then also, too, like Kevin Knight doesn't have a lot of muscle, him so doesn't Speedball Mike Bailey. So what are you doing with these guys, really? What are you doing with those 2 wrestlers that faced FTR, really? So there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of great matches, but no story, no build. You have your Australia show in about 3 weeks. There's no matches announced for Australia. Why you're not treating it like a big deal, really? Honestly, AEW, they have a lot of potential, but they really just don't execute to the best of their abilities. The storytelling is not that hard, really. As I said, make a tournament. Have Brody King talk about how he wants to go through that tournament and get to MJF and face him at Revolution. Then you can do a story about how MJF is harassing the Bandito family just because he wants to get to Brody King and his emotions. I think that would be the story of Revolution 2026. But they're gonna probably stick with Kenny Omega possibly retiring or something like that, really, and be like, hell, we're gonna have Swerve versus MJF at the Vancouver show, just because Dynasty is when Swerve goes after the title. And pardon me, I'm a little tired. I worked 14 hours. I'm working 92 hours this week, and then I got to go back to work at 4. But yeah, it's as I said, great matches, but there's not a lot of build or stories or things that are set up for the future, really. And this is where AEW struggles, and they don't care to get better from it. So all repeat wrestling.